Hi, I'm Tim. I'm doing a series of mini lectures on how gender does and doesn't intersect with biology. Like I said, I'm Tim. Hi. I have a bachelor's in biochemistry and a PhD in biomedical science. And I strongly believe that biology is both more interesting and more relevant to you than your experience with the educational system may have led you to believe. Just a quick outline. The first 4 videos are going to set the groundwork, get everyone on the same page, understanding what our terms are, etc. And the final 2 videos will take that information and synthesize it into an analysis of gender from a genetic perspective. My goal is to provide an understanding of biological concepts that affect our daily lives, show that biology is a lens through which we can view the world, just like any other. Furthermore, there are a lot of videos out there on the YouTubes that talk about gender as a social construct, etc. And they're very good videos, but often they contain some variation of the phrase, we're talking about gender identity, not biological sex. And I want to unpack that statement as a biologist. That phrase can allow space for bigotry to fester, right? Like, oh, well, we won't discriminate based off of gender. Your gender can be anything you want, just based off biological sex, as if biology somehow agrees with them. And I get it, right? I understand why BreadTube videos have phrases like that, because if biology, it's tricky. If it's not your thing, you don't want to say anything that's wrong. So I hope to fill that gap in the discourse. Also, in that same vein, I'm going to assume that you all have some baseline familiarity with gender studies, and not try to explain it myself because that's not my area of expertise. I'll have a list of videos in the description for anyone who isn't familiar, so you can catch up if you would like. Finally, by demonstrating no physiological basis for a strict gender binary, we will see that biological sciences have no place in disputes over trans or intersex identities. So let's get right into it, starting with DNA. I love DNA. It's one of my favorite things. So it's important to point out right from the start that DNA doesn't actually do anything on its own, any more than the cookbook means that I have lasagna. I'd still need the ingredients. I'd still need to put them together properly. DNA is just a bunch of instructions on how the cell can make the tools that it needs. They don't do anything or make anything themselves any more than the IKEA instructions that I have don't do me any good if I don't have the particle board. Or even though they added a recipe book to Minecraft, I still can't make anything that looks pretty. And I understand that doesn't actually tell you about what any DNA is, though. If you asked me what a horse was, and I told you about loads of things that a horse isn't, you'd probably be pretty annoyed with me. So DNA is an acronym. It stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's one of the 4 types of biological macromolecules. These are things that are only produced inside of living cells. They are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Broadly speaking, carbohydrates are sugars, lipids are fats, proteins are little machines that do all the work inside of the cell, and nucleic acids are the instructions on how to build proteins. There are 2 flavors of nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. I'm going to be talking almost exclusively about DNA in this series. We also won't be concerned with carbohydrates or lipids at all, so we can cross them off. We will, however, be returning to proteins in a later video. DNA, RNA, and proteins are all a class of materials called polymers. Now, we can think of any polymer as a series of beads on a string. Just like a necklace is made up of a bunch of beads strung together, a polymer is made up of individual but connected monomers. Now, if we're talking about DNA or RNA, these monomers are called nucleotides. So DNA is made of nucleotides. You can make lots of different kinds of necklaces, right? You can make different lengths. You can have different combinations and patterns of beads, and different people have DNA that's made up of different combinations of nucleotides. Although people who are related will have similar DNA sequences, everyone has their own unique DNA sequence. These monomers, the nucleotides, can be broken down into 3 distinct parts. They are a sugar, a phosphate, and a base. Now, the sugar and the phosphate are always the same, We often refer to them as the backbone of DNA. They do not change. The only way in which two nucleotides are going to differ is the base. Because it is the only thing that changes, what information is stored in DNA is determined by the bases. Each one of these monomers is part of a large set of instructions, a long nucleotide necklace that comes together to write instructions on how to build a single tool. The average set of instructions is around 3,000 nucleotides long. So these are long necklaces, long polymers of nucleotides. So what do these strings of nucleotides do? Well, I mean, what does a cookbook do? DNA is a language, and much like the English language has 26 letters, the language of DNA has only 4 letters. That doesn't mean it's any less complicated, just that the words tend to be longer. We call these words genes, and they're the subject of our next lecture. The 4 letters in the language of DNA are A, C, T, and G. And because neither DNA nor the cell can do anything on its own, the cell has to make its own tools, it has to make its own tools. But cells themselves aren't conscious, right? They don't think, they don't have a memory, so they need to have written down what tools they need, when they need them, and how to make them. That is what DNA is. It's the instructions. Now you know. Well, but to finish up, why is any of this even worth knowing? Why should you care? Well, DNA comes into and affects our lives in several ways. This can include paternity testing, through the court system, through cancer, and even those awful DNA ancestry tests. DNA is therefore a powerful and important force in our lives, and it behooves us to understand it and its limitation. The other reason I really wanted to do this is that there are statements that you've heard which imply some sort of intrinsic natural affinity or ability, which gets conflated with genetic differences in our current cultural milieu, even if they don't outright say they're genetic. Because that link between stereotype and genetic heredity is not explicitly dispelled, people often think that there might be some connection there, when in reality, they're just stereotypes. So what have we learned? Well, DNA is a physical thing, not some abstract concept. It is a physical thing that exists for a purpose, to instruct cellular machinery on how to build other bits of cellular machinery, tools that build other tools. We learned that just like written words, what letters there are and what order they are in is incredibly important. However, as we'll come to see in the following lectures, the genetic code is not the only thing that matters. Finally, DNA doesn't do anything on its own. It doesn't break chemical bonds, it doesn't form new molecules, it's just the instructions. So now you know about DNA. Thank you for watching. Don't hit like or subscribe, just have a good day.